Hi, I'm Shannon, and I'm back from houseimprovements.com. Today I'm going to show you part 2 of our How to Build a Deck series. And part 2 is going to deal with the framing of the deck. So that's the ledger board on the house, the joists, the beam that holds the deck up, and the posts as well. So before we get started, I just want to talk a little bit about the bits and pieces that we're going to show here initially. So we're going to start out by putting the ledger on the house. And you can see over here we've already done half of it. So we've got a pressure treated 2x10 piece of lumber here, bolted through to the sill plate of the house. And we've also got a piece of flashing right here that's tucked up underneath the siding that you can see we have cut out. We've got a little bit left to cut here yet, but we cut the existing siding out so that we can put the ledger right against the sill plate of the house. So what I used for the flashing is just a simple piece of vinyl window and door cap. So the reason I used vinyl is because it's going to be up against the pressure treated decking, and you've got to be careful what metals you put against pressure treated decking. So in most cases they recommend copper for this, and the price of copper is quite expensive, so they recommend basically copper or stainless steel or a vinyl product. So that's why I use this. It's the least expensive of the options and still does a good job. And the basic reason for this is so that any moisture that comes down the wall here now the deck boards will be on top of here yet, but the moisture would come down and it can't run back in between the ledger board and the rim joist and rot either one of them out. So it basically just deflects the water out onto the deck, or under the deck, so it can get away from the wall system. So okay, so and then for the bolts, depending again on what size of deck you're doing, space or the length of your joists and that sort of thing, will determine a little bit on the size of bolts or the spacing of the bolts as well that fasten that ledger to the wall. We're using these coated deck bolts, ledger bolts, that are made to deal with the ACQ type, or sorry, with the pressure treated decking. So it's basically an ACQ compatible fastener is what it is. But you could use hot dip galvanized leg bolts. You could use hot dip galvanized through bolts, anything like that. One thing you want to remember is make sure your bolt has some kind of washer, or at least a pretty good size head, so that it can't pull right through the ledger board itself. So these guys, they don't recommend a washer. They say this is wide enough, and so we didn't use a washer at all. They also didn't say that you had to pre-drill. In fact, it said no pre-drilling required. If you're using a bigger bolt, a lot of times I'll use hot dip galvanized 1/2-inch leg bolts. So with those, I would drill a 1/2-inch hole through the ledger board, and then just about a 5/16 pilot hole into the rim joist. Just because of the size of that bolt. But these guys say you don't need it, so we didn't do it. So that's the basics there. Also, anytime you're cutting pressure treated lumber, you want to treat the cut with a preservative, whether it's clear or green or whatever you want. Should go on any exposed wood after you've cut it. So we did have to cut this one end to get the length that we wanted on the second piece, so that's already been treated. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut the rest of this siding off just to kind of show you. We've done most of it. I've done the other end. I'm going to do one vertical cut here just so you get the idea of working with this, because we're cutting where the lap of the siding is. So it doesn't, as you can see here, it won't always cut right through. But I just want to kind of show you that, so you're not cutting way into the rim joist of the house or something. Also, it's not a bad idea just to have a look, make sure there's not going to be hopefully any electrical or plumbing or anything like that, not only on the inside of the house up in those spaces so these bolts don't go through and puncture something, but also out here so you're not hopefully having to cut through it or anything like that. As far as the length of your leg bolts, while I'm just thinking of it, basically what you want to be is at least a 1/2 inch longer than the two boards that you're going through. So in our case, we've got 1.5 inch ledger board and 1.5 inch rim joist on the house, so we've got a total of 3 inches. So you'd want a minimum of 3.5 inch ledger bolts to go through there, so it actually does protrude through a little bit. These ones are actually 3 5/8, the box says. So okay, so we've got that. So I'm going to put on my safety glasses and ear protection, and I'll finish this cut. I'm going to do one cut like I said, just randomly vertically, just so you see how to do that. I've already done it on the two ends where we actually needed it, but I'll do it here so that you can see, and I think we're probably going to have to reset the cameras to a different angle for this. Okay, so I just finished that cut off. Now we need to remove this piece of siding as well as this one here. And generally speaking, with this type of siding, you should be able just to pry it loose and dispose of it. So you'll find, once I get this lip off, this piece is going to be nailed on. Generally, it will just pull out like so, like that. And you can kind of see again where I did this test cut, just as an example, where it didn't quite cut through, but because we're cut through across the top, it's not really an issue. You could finish that off if you had to with a small saw or recip or even a knife with this particular siding. So up in this corner, right here, you can see, because I'm trying not to cut past what's visible when I was doing the cut, there's a little bit of that siding left. So just carefully score it with the knife without trying to cut the paper or house wrap or whatever you have behind yours. Now this would be the same idea if you had vinyl siding. Obviously you aren't going to cut it with a skill saw like that though. You're likely going to cut it with a knife or snips possibly, but you do want to remove it. With stucco you probably could leave it on there and just go over it, but I still would recommend you remove it. Now that's a little more work. So there's a couple nails left in here. I'm just going to pull them out. That's what was holding the siding row on. I'm going to leave that, in this case, tar paper on there. Yours might be house wrap. I'm going to leave that on there, but there is a starter strip down here that the siding was sitting into. So I'm going to pry that off. I need to cut this end. I'm going to pry that off to get it out of the way, and then we're just about ready to start putting the ledger in place. Trying to hold it up there so you can kind of see what I'm doing. Basically it's just held on with a few shingle nails, and this metal one like this basically will break right through the heads of the nails. If the heads stay there, that's fine. We'll just pound them tight, flush. So I'll just finish removing this and then we'll come back. Okay, so we've got this all ready here to put in the flashing and put the ledger board on. I've gone and pre-marked the ledger board. So what I've done here is at the ends and the joints of the ledger board, I put 2 bolts, as you can see here. I think you can see them. And then they're spaced about every 18 inches after that, about 2 inches down from the top. If possible, you can stagger them. In this case, our ledger board is going to hang down where the concrete is, so I just decided to keep my regular ones all just spaced along the top there evenly at 18 inches. Again, that will vary a little bit depending on the load on your deck and the specs, so you'll have to kind of work that out by asking somebody who can help you with that, I guess. Every situation is a little different, but these guys actually recommended 2 feet for this deck. On the box for these anchors, they had a bit of a chart. I went 18 inches just to be sure that we had a little extra there. So something else maybe I didn't mention is how we determined the height of this ledger board. So basically what I did is, because we've got a door here, and most people will have some kind of door coming out of the home onto the deck, we wanted to be sure that when we put the deck boards on, which are 1.5 inches thick, that it was going to fit down below, you know, the threshold or any trim on the door. The door isn't going to hit it when it opens or anything like that. Preferably you want to be, you know, fairly close here. I've got about an extra 1/4 inch in between the bottom of the threshold and my board. It's not a very safe or comfortable thing if you come out of the come out the deck, out the door, and you have a 3-inch or 4-inch drop down onto the deck. A lot of people are going to trip and fall. You'll probably get used to it, but company or children will definitely be tripping all the time. So you want to try to keep it up to a comfortable height, so it's just a nice step in and out of the house. So that's how we determined the height. And what I did is I just cut the siding just slightly higher, because when the deck boards go on, it'll butt over against the siding and cover any gap you have there anyway. So okay, so this flashing I talked about before, we're just using vinyl window and door cap for vinyl siding. This is easily cut with snips. Most metals that you're going to find to put on here are going to cut with tin snips to whatever length you need. But you don't want to just butt the pieces together. You want to actually overlap them by about 6 inches. Okay, so it just so happens that 2 full lengths of this doesn't quite make it all the way on the length of our deck. So I'm just going to put a little splice here right in the middle. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is get this piece of flashing up in underneath the siding. So you may have to pry that out a bit. If there's like under the door, we don't have it over here, but under the door, the little strip of siding that was there was nailed with a few nails to hold it in place. So we just V-notched this back lip here of the channel so that we could slide them up and get around those nails without removing the nails. So just once you get it started, it usually goes all right. Just get it up underneath there. I'm just kind of fighting with the paper a little bit. There we go. So it basically fit just up underneath there. We want to make sure that it's right out to the ends of our ledger board, and then we've got this as an overlap here in the center where our joint's going to be. Then with the ledger board, with some assistance from the cameraman down at that end, we're going to hold it up there. I'm going to flush it up at this end because we already know this is good. We've got it level. I'm going to just put one nail from the pass load gun into this end, and then I'll use a level to double check this piece here. Typically I would have cut all this siding off in one shot, figured out my height to the top here or the bottom, snapped a chalk line, and just use that as a guide. But because we kind of did this in 2 steps, I'm just going to use the level anyways. So like I said, he's just holding that end up. Everything down there looks like it'll be all right. Okay, and I'm just lifting my end up flush to the end of the one we already installed. And I should have had my glasses on. I've got them right on my head. So I put one in there. I'm going to grab the level. Just get my partner to lift that up just a little bit on that end if you can. Oh, sorry, down. Sorry, my bad. Right there. So we're level. I'm just going to tack it here at this end. I'll just double check that it's good right out to this end. Looks nice. And those tacks will just kind of hold that up there until such time as I can get all the bolts in. Okay, so I'm going to grab some bolts here and a impact driver. And like I said before, I've marked the spots. So you can maybe see here that I've got 2 marks at a joint. I want to get 2 at the joint. And then I've got to mark every 18 inches after that. Part of the reason I picked 18 inches is because my joists are going to be 16 inches on center. That way it should work out that I never have one of these sticking out in the way right where a joist is going to be. So I'll start by driving one in. And you don't have to sink them really crazy home, just let it snug that board back. You can see how that pulled this joint in pretty nicely. I'm just going to go all the way along. I've got single ones now all the way along the top. I'm going to come 2.5 inches down or so, and I've got pencil marks for the distance. till I get to that end where I'll put another pair of them. You can see it sucks it in there nice and tight. Something else to mention, and if you've watched any of my other videos about framing before, you always want to, if the wood has any crown, and by crown I mean when you look down this piece of wood from the end across the top of it, if it has a crown, you want the crown to go up. You don't want it to go down. So always put the crown up. That's what this little arrow right here was when I had a look at them when I was getting them ready. I just marked which way the crown was as a reference. So yeah, for your joists and all that kind of stuff, beams, you always want the crown to go up on the lumber you're using. Thought I'd better mention that while I was thinking of it. I'm going to go right to the end, just it's not quite tight to the wall, so I'm going to put my two end ones in so I can hold it tight. Sometimes you'll find when you're driving something in, especially when you don't have it pre-drilled, as you get through the first piece and into the second, the first outside piece wants to pull away actually a little bit. If you just back your bolt out and then go in again, or your screw, it should pull it tight again. Okay, so we got that back tight to the wall. A couple more here. Okay, so as far as this molding here goes, you really, at this point, can't fasten it or anything. It's just going to get pushed down here tight, and when you do the deck boards, one's going to be sitting overlapped onto it anyways to kind of hold it into place. But there's just, you don't really want to try to avoid doing any face nails. If you absolutely had to, just do the odd one through the siding, but you know, your siding's not going to fly off. It's nailed right here. It's going to be just fine. So when I go to do my joists, what will happen, this is just a little piece, but when I go to put my joists on here, you can see there's some movement in that this way. So my joist will go across there and kind of hold it back as well. Okay, so I'm just looking here. Looks like that's all going to be good. We've got all our bolts in. So I think we're good on that initial step. Now kind of the next step is going to be to build our beam, get it set up, get it set on the post so that we can start putting our joists on. Just before we do the joists, then I'll lay all the joists out as far as marking exactly where they're going to be. Like I mentioned, I think just a few minutes ago, they're basically all going to be 16-inch on center. And a lot of decking, you know, you can kind of look, especially when you get into the composite decks, some of them require a minimum of 16 inches. A lot of them are getting so that they'll allow you to do 24 inches, but it gets a little spongy on some of them. So I like to use 16 inches, and even sometimes for composites, I'll go 12 inches on center just to be sure. We're using 2x6 pressure treated. 16 inches on center is more than sufficient. I mean, I probably could have gone 24 inches, but I kind of tend to overbuild a little bit. I'd rather be a little stronger than it needs to be instead of having an issue down the road. So we've got our ledger on, and like I said, the next step is that beam, so we'll get at that next. Okay, so we're getting ready to put the beam together here, and in our case, we've got your beam size kind of comes all down to the length of your joists coming from span, or what the span of your joist is, and also how many posts you have under your beam all determines what your beam size needs to be in it. There's so many variables, I mean, I can't tell you just one certain rule. Basically what we've got, our deck, the span from where it attaches to the house to where the beam is, what did that work out to? It was 10.5 feet. Okay, so that's the span of our joists. The beam total is 16 feet long, and I'm putting 3 posts underneath it. They're each coming in about 1.5 feet from the end, one in the middle, and again 1.5 feet in from the end. Now in our case, we're using a doubled 2x8 pressure treated lumber. It's all going to depend on what you're doing and your particular situation. You could have a 3-ply 2x8. It might be 2-ply 2x10, 3-ply 2x10. It's all going to kind of depend on exactly your size of the deck and the spans and everything. So for our deck, this is what we're doing. So anyways, I've got the pressure treated lumber laying here. So again, like I said, they're 2x8 pressure treated. They're 16 feet long. I cut them. My deck at that point is actually 16 feet outside to outside. I cut these 1/4 inch under that. So my beam ends are just in a little bit and not protruding out. So I cut it to length. I used the wood preservative on the cut ends again, which I think they're both ended up down there. So they're treated. You also, like I mentioned before, you want to put your crowns up. So I marked my crown. You probably can't see, you might see the arrow later on when I move down there, but I've got this right now as the top of my beam right here, the way it's laying. So I want the crown up. I'm going to put, I'm using hot dip galvanized nails. These nails are 3 1/4 inches long, so I'm going to angle them slightly so they don't hopefully protrude out the back side. And for this 2x8, I'm going to use rows of 4 nails. I'm going to come in about 4 inches from the end here with my first row, and then about every 16 inches after that. So 4 nails every 16 inches. I'll do it all the way down the length, then I'll flip it over and do the same thing on the other side. So I'm using this cordless nailer, but you could be hand nailing it or whatever. I wouldn't screw it. You could use through bolts. I wouldn't use screws, they're a little too brittle. So nailing is better for this. So to start out with, I'm going to flush, because I know this is the top, I'm going to flush the 2 up nice and flush to each other. I'm going to slightly angle the nailer. So I've got my 4 nails in down here, and I'm just going to move over approximately 16 inches and do my next row, and I'm just going to work my way along. And as I'm doing that, I'm moving the 2 pieces, because I've got 2 2x8s there. I'm going to move the 2 pieces to try to always get this flushed up, you know, if one's a little more crooked than the other. So I'm going to move over. I know that this nailer here is about 13 inches, so I just kind of use it as a gauge. You can see here possibly my arrow on there that I had to show which way that piece was crowned. Okay, so I rolled it over, and I'll just do the same thing on this side. Okay, so we've got our beam all nailed together and made up. Now what we need to talk about is how we're supporting that beam. In your case, in most typical cases, you're probably going to have concrete piles, maybe even just those small concrete deck blocks. If you're using those deck blocks and it's allowed in your area, I would also add you know, a 16 or 18 by 18 concrete patio block underneath that deck block. It just spreads that weight out and gives you a better solid surface. So like I said, you're probably going to have piles, which you might have already done before you got your beam ready and everything. So you need to determine how far from the house that's going to be, what the spacing is, you know, drill them, fill them with concrete, throw a couple rods of rebar in them too, and smooth the top off. Anyways, if you're doing piles, that's a whole different issue, and we can't really show that to you here in this case. We've got concrete pad, like you already know, that we're working off of. So I had the luxury of being able to snap out some lines to show the basic edges of the deck. Now this line isn't the edge of the deck, the edge of the deck's out here somewhere, but this side line here is the one edge of the deck, and this chalk line that you actually see here is my beam location. So it's kind of nice in this situation to be able to just snap it out right on the ground. You may have to use string lines or whatever to get yours all figured out, but anyways, these adjustable brackets here, in our case, this deck isn't real high off the ground, so we actually aren't even going to need a post between the bracket and the beam. So our beam's just going to be able to sit right in these brackets, and they're just completely adjustable here for height. Manufacturer recommends keeping about 3 inches of threads in this sleeve, and the sleeve, as you can see, is bolted to the concrete, and we've got one more to do yet, so I can kind of show you how to do that. So that's fixed to the concrete to keep this base nice and solid. Once all the weight gets on, everything holds down nicely, and the beam is then attached to this bracket as well. Now, the one thing that's a little iffy is we're still not actually attached to the ground in this particular situation. So if you're in a tornado area, this particular bracket may not work for you, because in theory that deck could still pull out of here. So even though where we are we get some pretty strong winds and we call it a hurricane by jokingly, we definitely do not have a high risk of tornadoes here, so it's not completely required to be fully inserted in the ground. So anyways, like I said, if you had a post, there's lots of different versions of this. There's some that are similar to this without this bracket that actually would embed in your concrete. If you're doing piles or pouring concrete, you could still use the same system and embed it right in the concrete, and then insert a post and go up from there to attach to your beam. So anyways, we don't need to do that. I'm going to show you how to attach this next adjustable bracket right here. So I marked along here our locations. The X is the center of my bracket. Now with these ones I can look right down the middle and see my center location. It's not that you really need to be quite that exact. You know, one inch one way or the other isn't going to make a huge difference here, but I'm going to basically put it on my mark. Just mark out my holes I need to drill. I'll move that out of the way, and then I'll just use my hammer drill here to drill the holes, and then I'm going to use in these, what do they actually call these ones? These wedge anchors. So they basically just hammer in, you might have seen me use these on one of my other videos dealing with attaching wood to concrete. So I'm just going to get the drill going here, drill these holes quickly, and we'll put the bolts in. So I've got those drilled. Now I'm going to use some air to just blow that dust away. So we've got the holes all blown out. You might have noticed I didn't get as deep on these two. I must have hit a row of rebar, so I could only go down as deep as I could go. Still should be sufficient. So I thread the nut on first, just in case I damage the threads. Just hammer that in till it bottoms out. I can see it's not real straight, so I'm just going to straighten it up there a little bit. So I'll get all these in, and then we'll place the bracket. I'll just pull all these washers and nuts off, and we'll probably have to do some adjusting on these to get it all to line up to the holes. So I'm just kind of using the base of the this as a bit of a template. Well, that didn't work out as great as I wanted it to, but I think these two, when I hit that rebar, maybe moved over just a little bit. We'll see if we can get it tightened down. If not, I may have to try to drill those holes out just a little more on the bracket. Okay, so that's sucking down there, so worked out okay. So we've got that on there good and solid. And I'll just get this kind of adjusted half close. So now we're ready to drop that beam in there. It takes a little more work when there's 3 or 4 of these that it has to sit into, because getting them all lined up perfectly, but we'll see what happens here. Okay, so I will just check this for level. And I had kind of pre-adjusted it. It looks like I was all right, so you can see it's level there. I just have to adjust this center one up. Just like so, so it's up there tight. And like I said, I'm not going to put the bolts in these yet until I've got the deck frame sitting on here, and then that way if I have to do some final minor adjustments one way or the other, I can still slide the beam. But you do want to make sure you get your bolts in there. Also, I may have to still adjust this whole beam down. Ideally we want the deck to slightly slope at the top of the deck this way, so any water drains away from the house. So like I said, this is about a 10.5 foot span. I probably want the deck to drop, at least half an inch in that 10.5 feet. So just to be sure that there is definitely some slope away here. Now the concrete is already sloped in this case, so any water that goes through the deck is going to run away anyways, but yours might not be that way. It's maybe a good thing to mention too, while I'm just thinking of it, that any prep work underneath the deck that you want to do, if you want to put crushed rock or put some landscape fabric down with rock on it or whatever, you probably want to do it before you kind of get right to this stage. Do your piles and then do all your landscaping underneath. Make sure you got your dirt sloped away from the home. Do whatever landscaping you want underneath, and then go ahead and frame your deck, because it's going to be a real pain afterwards. Okay, so we've got our beam basically temporarily sitting in the position it needs to be. Now I just want to talk about laying out the ledger board for the joist spaces. We're using 16 inches on center. So to lay that out, all you want to do is start at one end, hook your tape right on the end, because that'd be the outside of my first joist. And then I want to just come over. Here's the 16 inches. So this would be the center of the joist. So I need to come back 3/4 of an inch and make my line. Okay, so this is the actual right-hand edge of the joist, and you see I have an X here. This is it, just indicating this is the side of the line the joist sits on. So leave it hooked there. Just go to every 16-inch mark. On my tape, they're all marked out in red right here. But make sure you come back 3/4 of an inch from each one. Okay, and just go all the way down your all the way down your ledger. Now, in our case, we're putting a perimeter 2x6 around our deck, and so I need a little bit extra blocking and a couple extra joists to do that. So now, once I've marked out all my regulars, I went back and determined where I needed other joists to sit. So you can see I'm going to have one right here, but then I've got another one right here, and you'll see once I get to putting the decking on why that is. And also on our particular deck, it's a little bit of a funny shape here. I've got a 4x4 little platform that comes off on the side here, and then the rest of the deck continues out here for 12 more feet. And then after this 4-foot protrusion, there's a set of stairs goes down, and it's the same way on both ends of this deck. But you'll see that as things come along here. So kind of the next step that I'm going to do, we'll have to reset the camera, and I'm going to start out by putting some joists up. And you'll notice I'm not cutting them to length. We're looking for approximately 12 foot out from the house for the main part of the deck. In my particular case, if it happens to be 2 or 3 inches over that, you know, by the time I've got the width of the ledger and everything on, in our case it isn't going to matter. So I'm going to put them all on full length. Your boards may not be all exactly the same when you buy them. They may be slightly different, but I'm going to put them up, snap a line down the end. If they happen to be all the same length, then that's perfect. I don't have to do anything. But if they're a little bit in and out one or the other, then I just will trim them off at that point. But you're going to see all that. So I'm going to bring the joists in. I want to put the crown up every time. I'm going to put it against the wall, and we want, remember our flashing will push back. We want the top of the joist flush with the top of this. And I'm just going to put 1 or 2 quick nails into it just to tack it into place. But then we will put joist hangers on, and you do need to have joist hangers on. So we'll just reset the camera and go from there. Okay, so we just laid a few joists up here. We're using pressure treated 2x10. And I've marked them all out so I know which way the crown is. Obviously I want the crown up, and I've just got these ones ready to go. So like I said before, we're just going to stand them up. I'm going to get them up here where I want to and on the line that I want, and I'm just going to tack them in place for right now. So I'm just getting it on the line, flush to the top. And tacked into place. Okay, so I have it tacked in, and the reason I tack it is just because to try to put the hanger on, if you went along and just put all your hangers on, some of these can be slightly different in width. So it's just better to put them all on tacked flush to the top here, and then go back and put your hanger on there. So for the hanger, make sure it's compatible with pressure treated lumber. With the hanger, what I want to do, I'm using also the proper screws for it, not just deck screws. And I just pull it up tight to the bottom of the joist, get one of these screws in. These screws are, these are 1.5 inches, these ones, but you could use 1.25 inches even. And you're just wanting to put a screw in each and every hole. I'm just kind of getting both sides up here. So make sure it's tight up to the bottom. Okay. Now they send this driver bit here with these screws. It doesn't have a magnet in it, which would be a lot handier. So once you got your screws all in the sides, there's also a couple that go in here. So just place those in. And like I said, do it on both sides. Okay, so we've got our first joist in. Now I'm not going to worry about this end for right now, as long as it's sitting up on the beam and not going to fall off. And I would just keep working my way along, doing the same thing for every one of them. Now you'll notice I'm going to have another one right away, right close here, and like I mentioned a few minutes ago, you'll kind of see why that is a little later on. But I'm just going to continue along. Okay, so we've got the main joists all put in with the joist hangers and everything. And now we're going to deal with this outside rim joist. And you may be able to see that some of these aren't 100% the same length. In fact, if I pull this, get lucky enough to pull this string across the ends, you'll be able to see it easier. So you can see there's a few here that are a little shorter than the others. So what we're going to do is snap a line and cut them all off so they end up being the same length and straight. So I've determined a measurement just from the ledger board, marked it here, and I'll just pull a string line across to get a straight line to the other end. Then I'll square that line down on every one and cut them to length. So I'll just grab here's a square. So from this line that we've got there on every one, I'll just square down like so, and then I can cut them all off and they'll all end up being the same length then. I'll just do a few here just to show you. Okay, so we've cut all our joists off. We've treated the ends that we cut with the preservative. I've also cut my my end joist, my rim joist to length, and treated the end that I cut. And I also marked it out the same as what's on the wall for the positions of the joists. Now, if you're doing this by yourself, which I am right now, I just nailed or screwed this scrap piece of wood on the bottom of a joist down at this end, so when I flip this down, it'll hold that end up and allow me to kind of work by myself. So we're going to start at this end, and remember, my joists aren't attached to the beam yet, so you got to be careful not to jostle it around too much. So I'll just flip this down, get it somewhat close. I'm using the hot dip galvanized nails. Get this flush down here. Come on. Okay, so now it'll kind of hang there on its own. Okay, so I've got one nail in there to hold it up. I'm going to be nailing this with 4 nails in the end of each one. We don't need joist hangers on the inside afterwards because the joists are supported by that beam. They're not being supported by this attached to anything, so the nails are going to be more than sufficient. If this was going to be exposed, I would mark an actual spot for each nail or screw that you're using, just to make it look good. In my case, when this deck's all done, this is going to be covered up again anyway, so I'm not too worried if they don't look 100% pretty. So I'll just finish nailing this first one, and then you can probably see here there's a slight the joist is higher than the rim joist on most of these. So once I nail this first one on, I'm going to just stick a shim under here on the beam just to lift this up so that I can play with those ones a little bit. Just remember to take that shim out after. It'll just allow me to get those flush easier. Sorry, I think I said I was going to put 4 nails, but I was wrong. It's 2 by 10, so I'm going to use 5. Also, was thinking this a little while ago. 2x8s would have been sufficient for the joists in this size of deck. I went with 2x10s because of the fact that we're using wooden 4x4 posts for the railing. And the 2x10 just gives it a little bit more structure to make those posts a little stronger. So the 2x10s, some of you might be saying, oh, that's overkill. It is really for the deck, but for the railing, I'm using 2x10 to help that out a little bit. Okay, so I've raised that up. Oh, shoot. This should have been facing the other way. I've got to knock that off and turn it up because now I've got the crown down. Too much talking, not enough thinking here. So I need this to be this direction. That's going back on our support there. I'll get this all flushed up again. That'll be better. Okay, so now I can just line my joists all up with the lines that I have on the inside, which is the proper side this time, and get it flush on the top here with the joist. Actually, I want to leave that one out for now, and I'll show you why in a few minutes. I'm just going to skip that one. So I'm just going to go all the way along and do all of these. Okay, so we finished nailing the end rim joist on. We've cut some blocking to go in between here, and basically if you've got more than 8 feet between your supports, which in our case is the house and the beam, you should put a row of blocking in about halfway through the span. So determine where that's going to be, snap a chalk line from end to end, and then cut the blocks the right measurement to fit, because we're 16 inches on center, so they should be about 14.5 inches. So I've cut a bunch, I've treated the ends, and then to make it easier to fasten, to nail, just stagger them on every second one on each side of the line. So now I can end nail each one without having the other one that I just finished in the way. I've just put 3 nails in each one of these. These are just to keep it from racking, and they give it a little bit of extra strength up and down as well between the span. You'll notice here that I've got some short ones in here between these narrow spots. The reasoning for this is we're going to put a border around this whole deck to start with. It'll be 2x6, so obviously it's not going to be this wide, but so we're going to have a border all the way around the perimeter, and then our deck boards will butt into that. So because it's 5.5 inches, if I didn't have anything here, it'd be tippy. So this is just so the length of the board has something to rest on. It's just like mini joists running the other direction. So put in all the main spaced ones first, and then you're usually going to have the very last 2 spaces on each end are going to be a different number. So what I do is put all my regular ones in, and then I know in our case our total deck's supposed to be 16 feet right from outside here to outside over there. So then I will measure and see what it's at to figure out what I want to cut these blocks at. Sometimes you end up spreading this a little bit or shrinking it if these blocks are a little off, so I always leave the last couple out and cut them to fit. So just go along and put those in. And you just want them flush to the top, these ones. If anything, you want them flush, or even if these ones are set down a bit, that'd be fine. Those perimeter ones that I had need to be flush, but Okay, I just realized I forgot to actually square the top of the platform. So to do that, we're going to measure it diagonally, and we should end up with the same two numbers. I should have really done it before I added that whole row of blocking, so it's going to be a little harder to move now if it is out of square. But anyways, we'll deal with that. So we'll measure diagonally here. I've got 240 and a half. And 240 and 3/4 here. So it's got to go to the left, well, basically probably 1/8 of an inch. So what I'll do is I'll just see if I can move it myself. And I'm just going to try to rack the deck that way, and then we'll check the diagonals again. There, I got it some, so we'll see if that's enough. I probably went too far. That's 240 and 3/4, so we're probably too far now. And 240 and a half, so we're exactly the opposite. So I just need to pull it back a little bit this way. And I can pretty much tell that now on the end of the beam. So I would imagine right there is going to be good. So this is one way to check the squareness of any rectangular or square surface you have. 240 and, yeah, 5/8 basically. Yeah, 240 and 5/8. So now we're okay. So what I'll do is I'll actually tack that into the beam. We've actually got the beam bolted in a couple spots, so it can't move right now. So I'll just give this a bit of a tack here just to keep it from moving. I just need to make sure my beam's straight up and down. So I'm just going to toe nail one of these joists into the beam like that. That'll just keep things from moving around on us till we can get it all fastened down. Okay, so I've just got to finish cutting those blocks in that center row at each end. And then we'll come back to fastening it to the beam, and then we're pretty much done the framing part. You can see over on this side, there is a 4x4 jut out over there, and there will be over on that corner too. You'll see that in the next video. It'll all be framed up, but I'm not going too much into detail there. We're just dealing with this rectangular area for the framing part. Okay, so I'll just measure those and get them cut, and then we'll come back. Okay, so we've got all our blocking in. We've got the top of the deck squared up. We took a level on against the beam, pushed it in or out whichever way it had to be, and just tacked it on each end and in the middle to get it running plumb and straight. So now what we need to do is fasten the beam to those adjustable brackets and the joists to the beam. So for the brackets, we're going to use these 3/8, actually I think they're 5/16 hot dip galvanized leg bolts. They're 3 inches long, so they'll penetrate both plies of the beam. And we're going to put one in each hole on those brackets. So, I mean, there's no rocket science to this, just zip it in there. We've got one in there already that we put in earlier. Okay, just tighten it up. There's 2 holes on each side. Don't use deck screws, use leg bolts. Okay, so we'll do that on every bracket, okay? I don't think you need to see me do that on each one. Now we're going to switch to these brackets. So we're going to use a mechanical fastener to fasten the joist. I'm actually going to put these on this side, but I'll show you what it would look like on this side. Can I? There. Okay, so one end attaches to the beam and one end attaches up here to the joist, and we're going to use these same structural screws that we were using for the joist hangers. Now there's a lot of holes in here. For this purpose, these are actually like a hurricane clip for rafters. For this purpose here, I'm just going to place 2 of these structural screws in each flange, and that'll be enough. So, okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that. I want to do it on the back side here, so I'm afraid you're not going to really see all of it, but you'll see this one, the top part. So I'll just get it in here. Come on. Okay, so we got 2 in there. Something else we didn't show is mark the top of the beam spaced out for the joists. So we're just shifting the joists one way or the other if it needs to hit that line. Okay, so now that's securely down, sitting on there. If you remember when I fastened that end rim joist, I was kind of having to lift here and there and whatever. You can see here, this one joist isn't sitting on the beam. And that's because the joists sometimes are a little different in height from one to the other. So like that one's tight, this one's tight, that one's floating a bit. There's not too much we can really do about that. Still just tie your anchor on there and get it down there as best you can. So. Okay, so I'll just finish that all up off camera, and that kind of completes this section of the video. Okay, so I realize this was a pretty long video, and I hope you stayed right to the end here. You know, we basically showed you start to finish the basic framings for a fairly basic deck, and most of the scenarios we went through here will be very similar to any deck project that you have. So it should give you a good idea where to get going. This is a whole series on building this deck, so look for the next video. It should be one for doing the decking, one for doing the railing, and some stairs too. So look for those videos on our YouTube channel, and you can subscribe to the YouTube channel as well while you're there, and then you kind of get notified if we post anything new. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter. You can check us out as well on our website at house-improvements.com. Thanks a lot for watching.